thank you guys for being here first. And I understand that even though you've been longtime partners, this is the first time or one of the first times that the two of you have taken the stage together. Is that true?
Yeah, it's hard to get us in the same room.
I think we were on a lot of stages together, but it just there was nobody in the audience in the early days. So.
Well, so why now? Why is this the right moment? Why is today the right day?
I think where we are today is obviously it feels great. It's a place to celebrate, mostly because we can see where we're heading, what's next, and the momentum that we as a community have. But it's also kind of good to pause for a second and just reflect on how we got here. And so I think today is a celebration as much as what has come before us over the last 20 years, certainly that I've been an entrepreneur in Chicago since I first arrived here, since we've been building the tech community together in one way or another, and working with so many other organizations that have come along to do that as well. In many ways, the success that Chicago is seeing is poised for. People were building that and putting that effort in a long, long time ago to make this happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. Chicago as a community, we think we're excited by the success, we're excited by the unicorns, but this is something that's been building for a couple decades, right? And in some cases, a century. Chicago as a community has always been a multitude of industries. We talk about finance or real estate or logistics or food. These are all things that have been part of Chicago's economy for some time. But over the last 20 years, the industries here have begun to recognize, a little slow to the party, but they recognize that technology was transforming their industries. So there's been a slow build over the last 20 years as we've seen it. I've been here 15, Terry's been here a little longer than that. As these industries have begun to embrace technology and build the companies we see today that are really, frankly, transforming not just Chicago industries, but are the leaders in transforming globally things like food and real estate, logistics, and all those things.
So why don't we take a step back and, if you don't mind, take a few minutes and just kind of set the stage and talk a little bit about how the tech and venture scene today in Chicago is so different from the one that you encountered 15 or 20 years ago when you first kind of started out here.
You know, when I was a young entrepreneur, 20 years ago, there were half a dozen of us in a company that was relocating, and we had a U-Haul truck loaded with literally every possession that we had, and it was going to be turn left and go to San Francisco or turn right and go to Chicago. And we knew the date we were leaving, we just didn't know where. But we made a pact and said, wherever the first customer is, and we had been courting a couple, that's probably where we're going to end up. And I think that's actually illustrative, because what I discovered when I came to Chicago was that's what we have to offer, right? The customers are here, the industries are here. You heard earlier, no one industry out of 14 different industries dominates our economy, but we're still number 1, 2, or 3 in each and every one of those industries. And more importantly, number 2 or 3, right? Because that means you've got companies here that are motivated to innovate, motivated to try to grow into those leading positions. So I think the same thing that attracted me here 20 years ago as an entrepreneur is now playing out writ large with all of our major industries that are ripe for transformation.
Wish I could say I was as visionary as Terry, but my wife made me come to Chicago. So but the fact of the matter is, when I came to Chicago in 2005, there was not a lot of activity, right? It was hard to put people together in a room. There was maybe 1 or 2 things happening once a month, and we started to build a community around what we were doing, just because that's the way we work. Terry and I found each other and began to say, we like collaboration. Let's find ways to do that. Let's find events. Let's find opportunities. Let's create watering holes to do that. And it's been fun to be part of that over the past 15 years. And it's extraordinary today, given the plethora of everything that's going on. But it wasn't that way before, and it's reflective of where we've come as a community.
Just like companies have culture, and culture is king, the community had a culture, and does today. The difference 20 years ago and today, if you had an idea and you dared to raise your hand to say what that idea was, there was figuratively and quite literally 5 people that were likely to call you up and say, here's what's wrong with that idea. And today, you're going to get a lot more people call you up and say, let me help you make that idea better. And I think that collaborative nature of the culture, it's certainly something that we've been trying to champion for 20 years, and now I think you're seeing it, right? The organizations that have emerged to work together, the entrepreneurs that have learned to grow companies and build them together, and now the capital that is partnering up and becoming a collaborative part of that. I think collaboration is at the core of who we are in Chicago in ways that it wasn't 20 years ago.
And that capital is part of it, right? I mean, I can remember when everyone was excited, we crossed $500 million in venture capital in the city in 2008 or 2009. Dates me a little bit, not as much as Tebby. Tebby's old. But the fact of the matter is today we're at 5 billion already or some number, and we're going to have more than that by the end of the year. It didn't happen, it didn't just magically happen. It happened because this community came together, collaborated, and did some great things.
So for a long time, I felt like the question here was always, how do we make Chicago the next Silicon Valley? Do you feel like today that we've come up with an answer to that question, or do you think maybe it was the wrong question?
It was always the wrong question. It was always the wrong question.
Why is that?
So I'm going to interrupt Terry. We do that sometimes. Michael Jordan, we're in Chicago, so I can say Michael Jordan's the greatest basketball player of all time, correct?
Yes.
There is any basketball player that came after him would never be as good. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't be as good as Michael Jordan. They could be different. They could be a different type of basketball player. They'd be a different skill set. They could shoot the three-pointer. They could do things that were different. And they'd be the greatest basketball player for that era. But they couldn't be the greatest, as great as Michael Jordan. So us trying to be Silicon Valley was a losing cause from the get-go. We have to be something different. We have to be something more vibrant. We have to be something that takes different skills and different technologies. And that's why this whole, we need to be the next Silicon Valley was always the wrong goal. The wrong goal was to build the greatest tech ecosystem out there for its time.
And to leverage those things that were uniquely us, right? That question was being asked not just in Chicago, that question was being asked everywhere, all over the world. How do we be the next Silicon Valley? Well, once we, I think, began to realize the strengths that we do have here, we recognize that there's maybe something even better that can be created out of those assets in Chicago. I'm selfish. I believe that where we've been focusing a lot of our attention over the last 7 or 8 years especially is at that intersection of some of those industry leaders that are based here in the startup world, and thinking about how those whole industries are going to be regenerating. Fred and I grew up in the software industry, and it took me a little while to realize that what our corporate partners today, we work with the largest boat maker, the largest fire truck maker. We work in the aviation industry. We've done work in the mining industry and the construction industry, all with giant, big companies that have come to us and said, we got to figure out a much, much better way of working with entrepreneurs. Can you help us? And what we've learned in doing that was that all of the lessons we learned 20 years ago in the software industry, 25 years ago in the software industry, when Salesforce emerged and said, we're now direct to consumer, the VAR channel overnight disappeared. The systems integrators overnight disappeared. The idea of consumption-based pricing, the idea of having direct visibility into the features that your users care about and knowing which features they don't care about. Those are the lessons the software industry went through 20 years ago, and now the boat maker and the mining company and the airplane company are going through those exact same lessons. They're thinking about disintermediation of the dealer channel, direct to consumer, the value of an ecosystem, the value of an ecosystem around them. So that's why our time has come, because those companies now get to go through that same thing that Silicon Valley got to go through 25 and 30 and 40 years ago.
And those companies are here in Chicago and the Midwest. They're the ones that are here, right? Traditionally weren't the software companies. We were all those industries we talked about and we've talked about throughout today.
So you guys built an organization called TechNexus, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what that is, but especially how has TechNexus kind of helped to reframe the model and to kind of answer the question in a different way?
So when I was that young entrepreneur that came to town, I looked around and said, geez, there's got to be like other people here who want to help build companies. And so we invited like a half a dozen other entrepreneurs to come hang out on the roof of our office and have a beer one Friday. And then the following Friday, they all brought a friend, and by the end of the summer, the fire department shut us down because we had like 400 people hanging out on the roof of an office that didn't need 400 people on it. That was really the genesis of the Technology Association that we started here, and really bringing together the community as a tech community. TechNexus sort of built accidentally the same way. It was, well, we built a club, we need a clubhouse, right? Now that seems totally obvious. Now everybody understands the value of common watering holes and bringing people together, but at the time, not so obvious. But that was its ambition, was a clubhouse. Very quickly, though, other entrepreneurs began to say, geez, everybody I need to do business with seems to be hanging out here. And there's no other place that they can hang out. So maybe I should hang out here. Could I have a desk over in the corner? And then it was, would you introduce me to these people? And then that was a very quick jump to, would you spend 6 months in a whiteboard helping tear apart my company and put it back together again to get me ready to be introduced to these people, right? So something like 600 companies launched 50 feet away from us. Like $650 million got invested in companies while they sat 50 feet away from us. And all of that was accidental. Yeah. But a few years ago, we decided to try to do that again, and this time a little bit more intentional.
Right. Especially as the industry changed, as the community changed, right? When we started TechNexus, there was us, there was the watering hole. Now there's tons. There's great things like 1871 and mHub and Matter and pick whatever John Flavin was doing at Portal Innovations and other things. So the industry has evolved beyond needing to have that one-size-fits-all space or one-size-fits-all organization, one that was more prolific, and more extensive. And so at that time, we began to say, okay, what's next? And how do we address a different part of the market? And what's the, frankly, opportunity for us as entrepreneurs to build something different? And it resulted in something with a similar name, TechNexus Venture Collaborative, but a much different thing.
So what happened, and to answer your question, was while we were trying to figure this out, like how do we not miss the next $650 million that gets invested in companies that we sat next to or help, another strange thing started to happen. A lot of the large companies that we talked about earlier, folks that maybe Fred had done a favor for over the years, helped recruit a CTO to or something like that, they started coming in the door and saying, I have a secret. We trust you. Can I share my secret with you? My secret, I'm not very innovative. These were giant companies, right? It wasn't a secret. We understood that. But the ones that were coming to us were also saying things like, and I intuitively know that I need to be able to work with entrepreneurs, but for reals, not slapping my logo on your wall or, sponsoring a pitch contest or a Pet and Entrepreneur Day or any number of other types of things. We heard a lot of these companies that were coming to us and saying, I've tried the technology tourism trips to San Francisco, and it's just not really resulting in us learning how to do business with entrepreneurs. So we were trying to figure out what we wanted to be when we grew up again, and here these companies in our backyard, large companies, were telling us what they needed us to be, which was sort of ecosystem builders, which we had done and been, but now bespoke ecosystem builders around them and around their interests of entrepreneurial activity.
So our from the middle market to the large Fortune 500s, I don't think it is a secret that those big companies that we have in our backyard have a reputation for not being particularly innovative. How do we, and how does this community of innovators and investors and startups really encourage that kind of outside the box thinking and innovation and make those connections to that community? How do we start to kind of turn the behemoth around and get them to think about thinking differently and working differently with the startups and innovators that are in their own backyard and not just out in the valley?
74% of the companies, 734 of the companies that were on the Fortune 1000 list 10 years ago aren't on that list today. That's like the most unprecedented amount of churn of the largest companies in America in history. And the funny thing is you'll never meet a company who says, yeah, I'm probably in that 74%, right? All of those Fortune 1000 companies think they're in the rare group that's going to survive. But in 10 years, they've churned, they've merged away, they've gone out of business, they've been replaced by entrepreneurial new activity, or entire industries have gone away. The answer, I think, to your question that we figured out was we had to connect with what, at the end of the day, we think is maybe one or two people inside of most of these companies. And we refer to them as the rising CEO. It's the person that when you go to one of these large public, private companies, sort of Fortune 2000, our sweet spot tends to be sort of the $2 to $10 billion company. That really fits well for us. Much bigger than that, we think they can afford sort of innovation theater, and much smaller than that, they can't really keep pace with what we're trying to do at scale. But when you go into those companies and you say, hey, who's one or two people that work here who's probably going to be the next CEO? Everybody has an answer, right? They'll say, oh, Mary or Bill is, on pace to be that person. And that tends to be, inside of most big companies, one of the only people who have, one, a vision for how we might do things better or different, and two, something personally they're willing to risk to gain, to move into that new role or to drive into that new role. There aren't very many of those companies, or people easily identified in many of those companies, but we've been lucky and have found a number of great corporate partners where we have partnered up with that sort of rising CEO.
You're not getting specifics of model quite yet, but we've built trusted relationships with those people, and there are people that work with them, people that work around them, in order to look and say, if you could engage the venture ecosystem, if you could wave the magic wand and help it be a part of your innovation and growth, could we do it? And so we sort of shifted the paradigm with them a little bit and said, stop thinking of the ventures, especially the ecosystem, as threats, but look at them as an opportunity, and look at them as things that are relationships you can build to build the future of the company, build the future of the corporation. And we did that in a way that has now allowed them to embrace external innovation as a key driver of their future growth, not just, did I make some investments that were cool and I look cool because I'm an investor in Uber or whatever the case is, but about they're making investments that are transforming the way they do business because they've changed the paradigm of how they interact with them.
Mm-hmm.
So when we look at, the industries where Chicago and the region is strong, and there are many, looking into the future, what is the future of logistics look like? What does the future of heavy industry look like? What does the future of kind of manufacturing look like in the companies that you've worked with and the experiences that you've been having?
It's a lot of the exact same economic forces that went through the software industry 20 years ago, right? I mean, there's more direct-to-consumer relationships in all of those things. In the the boat manufacturer who has spent all of their life selling through dealers and not really having any relationship to the consumer on the end now recognizes that they've got to have that feedback loop. So the direct-to-consumer, the consumption-based, do I want to buy a boat or do I want to have a boating experience? Break that down even further. Do I want to have a boating experience or do I need propulsion as a service? Right? I mean, that kind of pressure is happening in the same way. But also that feedback loop, as I said, the ecosystem. I think you can look at something like Salesforce and what Benioff and team did. A lot of innovation, a lot of redefining of the industry there. I think the single greatest thing that they did was they built effectively the first marketplace around their business. Right? The App Exchange launched in, 06, I think, 05. And when App Exchange was put out there, at face value, that was like, oh, all these third-party developers who maybe have some custom version of our application, we'll put them on there. But really what was happening behind the scenes was the team at Salesforce was saying, hey, what if we could get behind the scenes data and information on what customers actually care about from a feature perspective, and who's building something that maybe we need to think about building ourselves or buying or investing in order to not be disrupted by them. I think it's the exact same economic pressures that industry went through that now really every industry is going through.
I would say that it's also being nimble, right? It's being able to respond to things in a quick fashion and using data to do that. One of our big unicorns these days we'll talk about is Project 44, and Project 44 reported the other day, and it was in the news too, that there's 72 cargo ships sitting off the port of LA that can't get themselves into the port and deliver all the goods that are there. It's a record number. So the action is, okay, knowing that that's happening and finding a way to react to it and address it in real time is something like Project 44 or some supply chain company is going to have to figure out. Rerouting ships, putting drones to go lift cargo containers off the ship. I don't know, there's lots of things that could come out of it. But all the industries here are going to have to be able to use the data, use real-time information to respond and evolve themselves and their products and react to their customers in new ways that they weren't doing before.
And why does a company like that succeed here? Because for 200 years, Chicago has been the center of the logistics universe. Because the people who understand that industry worked for all of those traditional companies. Many of them over the last year and a half are now sort of taking stock and wondering if they don't want to come put those expertise into startup world and be a part of maybe some of those kinds of business.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the food industry, right? And we're excited by all the food we've had today. And Cleveland Avenue was here earlier, and they're talking about them. But we've been talking about the food industry since 1906 when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, right? The food industry is part of Chicago. There's 120, 150 years of knowledge here. Let's use that to build the next great food industry or the next evolution of the food industry.
Now,
and that's what's happening.
I will say, though, and I think we should call out where things have changed. I think arguably at one time Motorola was the most innovative company on the planet, bar none. And yet, where's the ecosystem of related businesses that grew up around Motorola? There's a handful of companies that we might be able to name that were connected there, but nothing like if it had been based maybe in one of the Valley or something else. I think there would have been a much stronger ecosystem that emerged. Today, what's different is the companies that have had success, those people are now leaving the company to start something related in its backyard, right? Think about something like CleverSafe, right? A company was sold here a few years ago to IBM. And when Chris built that company for 15 years, the greatest thing I think that Chris accomplished for us as a community was dozens of local people became millionaires when that company exited. Dozens, not one or two, not out-of-state investors, dozens of people that were working there and investors there and had hung out in the community with him, played cards. They all became quite wealthy because of that exit. And now many of them are stuck around and they're starting new businesses and they're investing in new businesses. And a lot of those businesses are based on what they learned and what they proved at that. I think that's different.
So fundamental to those corporations is building their own ecosystems, right? Understanding that all these ventures are out there, but not just ones to here local. You got to build a global, but building ecosystems of organizations, of ventures, of startups, of related parties that are all working together to drive themselves up and to drive growth for all of them.
So we've come a long way, but obviously we haven't totally cracked the code. Where are the areas that you would like to see the most growth or the most change for the next 20 years?
Well, selfishly, I want to work with every one of those $2 to $10 billion companies in town that we know how to make things happen for now, right? Because that was sort of the aha moment for us. We had sat for 15 years helping incubate all these various different businesses, bringing people together, oftentimes putting a big company in a room with a small company and just watching them just talk past each other, right? They didn't speak the same language. They didn't even have the same DNA. And the startup was always on one side of the table saying, I've got the greatest thing. It's going to completely revolutionize your entire business. And I don't understand why you don't buy from me today. And I hope you do because I got to make payroll tomorrow. Right? And then the big company was always sitting on the other side of the table saying, geez, that thing that she's pitching to me, it doesn't really solve a problem that I have. I've got another problem that I won't tell her I have that I do think it might solve, but I'm not going to, lay all my cards on the table. That just happened over and over and over again. And so now the model that we've created is what happens if you actually create an ecosystem where there's some affinity that brings these people together. They're on the same side of the table a little bit. And the magic that comes from that is a hell of a lot of insight and a lot of commercial traction.
And the way we've done that is by going to a position where we would make small investments, $250,000 or so, in ventures to build an affiliation with a corporation. So what we've done in our model is instead of going out and trying to create a corporate venture arm for these corporations where you do $2, $3 million, $5, $3 million investments and the CFO is worried about the return of the money, no one's really trying to get the insight and the knowledge and the expertise and the relationships that are critical of that investment. They're more worried about the money. We've started out with very small investments as a way to build affinity. And it turns out when you make an investment, even if it's one the size of $250, all of a sudden all the issues in the corporation go away, right? All of a sudden now
Some.
we care about the it's just enough that they care, but not enough that you care a lot, right? So they start to get rid of the process, and the politics and legal all goes away. And magically, you can have a conversation, not always magically, but a lot of the times magically, you can have a conversation that's true and honest and goes to something stronger.
So we've formed these joint ventures with each of these corporate, bespoke joint ventures. And the purpose of the joint venture is really to immersively learn their business, their industry, to spend months in the same way that sort of high-end management consulting firms may come in, fully understanding this business. Except we're not smart consultants. We go and try to interpret what entrepreneurs from Tel Aviv to Texas and certainly here in Chicago are doing that might actually inform that strategy for one of those partners. Hey, what you're doing is great, keep doing it. Or maybe you should think of the market a little differently because this entrepreneur out there is thinking of it a little bit differently. We then use that insight after spending months of working with them to make investment decisions that we put our capital to work on. We've done over 200 investments in just the last couple of years. We were doing new venture investments on pace every 7 days. I think we're actually far more ambitious than that in terms of the scale that we're hoping to get to. And as Fred said, some of those start as really small checks, $250,000 sort of investments that say to the entrepreneur, hey, I have just spent months working with company XYZ or in this industry. And I think what you have, they would do business with. I think they would be your channel partner, they'd be your customer. They might be interested in investing in you, they might be interested in acquiring you, but that's not really the goal. This is about creating a business relationship. And I'm so convinced that that's the case. We'd love to invest, a small amount of money. Can we put $250,000 into a round you happen to have open, or maybe reopen a round for us? Just to show you that we have skin in the game, that we're serious, that we're not going to just let you waste a year and a half banging on the door of Big Co trying to get them to return your call. Most entrepreneurs love that. But then the other thing that happens after we do that small check is it gives us this privileged relationship. Now we get to see things from the inside that most VCs probably don't get to see until after they've made larger investments. And once we're there and learning this, we can make the decision to maybe follow on. And so we've now done, many of those. I mean, we've had things that scale up to $15 million investments really quickly. But it's after you've proven that it's worth a $15 million investment, that there is some strategic value there.
And that proof you're trying to build is not just the financial proof, which is obviously is important, but really is there something to build for the corporate partner that the venture can also benefit from? So are they building new revenue? Is it going to bring new revenue to the corporation and the venture thereby? Is it going to bring new products and services, new markets, all those things to the corporation to the point where they say, okay, our business is being transformed by these relationships in a way we never could have imagined, because we've opened the door, we've opened ourselves to to expose to external innovations and things of that nature.
All right, last question. What is the secret sauce to the Terry and Fred partnership? You guys have been together for a long time. You've seen a lot of different
glutton for punishment.
I don't know, I'm the quiet one. People ask that question, to be honest, people ask that question a lot. And even our team asks that question.
Really? You get that question a lot?
I do get that question a lot. And I've thought a lot about it, and our partners have thought a lot about it, our spouses thought a lot about it, and no one really has an answer to say except it somehow works. I really wish there was some definitive answer, but it just works.
I'm lucky enough to spend my whole life as an entrepreneur, and that is a lonely, lonely, lonely thing sometimes. Right? There are a lot of entrepreneurs in this room who know that. I started a first company when I was in high school, and never really had anyone. I had investors that were partners. I had certainly teammates on the companies that I was building that I would consider, peers and partners. But I think when you can find somebody that you just say, all right, we're in this together. Literally all in, we're in this together. That makes being an entrepreneur a whole lot less lonely and a whole lot, I think, more successful. I was lucky enough to find somebody who can tolerate me and that I think makes that work for us.
And vice versa. I mean, at the end of the day, it's trust. I mean, there's days we're like brothers who want to kill each other, but at the end of the day, we always trust each other.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both.
you.
This has been great for me to hear the story firsthand. I've gotten bits and pieces of it over the years, but it was a pleasure and an honor to speak with you both. And I'm looking forward to the next 20 years.
Well, I am too, and I want to take a moment to recognize you, your history here with World Business Chicago and this Venture Summit, and everyone else, Aben and Mark, Tebby. What you've put together here, I think, as I said, is standing on a lot of shoulders from the before, but you're taking it to next level. And I think the fact that we've got so many outside investors that are coming to town right now and recognizing how much opportunity there is to be gobbled up in Chicago ought to scare the living hell out of the capital in Chicago. There's more money that changes the hand in the basement of the Merck bathroom every day than all of Sand Hill Road, right? There's more money on the North Shore of Chicago family offices than in collectively most venture capital firms in California. We've got to figure out how to pay attention to this asset class in Chicago in the way that most of these out-of-towners are sitting out there right now saying, yummy. Right?
The sky's the limit for us. I mean, honestly, we're not even close to where we can be yet, and the path forward is great, and I'm so excited for where things are, even after being here forever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you.